The Gathering of the Enemies at Armageddon by G.S. Koch, January 12, 1941. Revelation 16, 10-16. Introduction. The picture of a brewing thunderstorm, which finally breaks forth with all its fury. The judgments of God often seem very slow in coming, so much so that sometimes men are ready to accuse God of delaying unjustly. However, God abides his time, and finally lets the full storm of his wrath fall upon the ungodly, as we see in the pouring out of the bowls of wrath. The first 4 bowls have been poured out, and there are still 3 to be poured out. 2 of these, I believe, belong together because they serve to bring the armies of the world upon the battlefield which is called Armageddon. I wish to speak, therefore, about the gathering of the armies of the world upon the battlefield Armageddon. Not yet about the battle, but about the gathering of the armies for the battle. The battle is described in the later part of chapter 19. Subject: the gathering of God's enemies at Armageddon. Part 1. The terrible condition of these enemies. They have been struck by 5 terrible judgments. One plague after the other has been thrown upon them. They have received terrific blows from God. The very throne of the beast has been struck. The kingdom of the devil has been attacked in a very vital spot. His kingdom has been darkened. All light, understanding, wisdom, insight, hope, or virtue has been taken from it, and total blindness sets in. They are in terrible agony as a result of all the plagues which have fallen upon them. They have a foretaste of hell even in this life. They are filled with a terrible hatred against God. Hardened, they blaspheme him, even though they know that he is the highest God, the only living God, the God of heaven. Not a sign of repentance is present. This anger prepares them for destruction. Whom the gods would destroy, they first make angry. They are the solid army of all the ungodly. Not any particular nation or group of nations over against another group of nations. There are not 2 different armies or 2 or more separate nations gathered, but all the armies of the world are on one side. Not the present array of nations in this war, with Germany and her allies on one side, with England and her allies on the other, that does not fit in at all with this picture. No doubt this war does and will serve to bring us nearer to that great battlefield, but we do not have it yet in the full sense of the word. Part 2. By what means they are gathered. It is God who brings them there. Though they will march as if at their own volition, he brings them together. Keep in mind, this is a judgment of God. He first darkens them, blinds them, and then brings them to the battlefield, even as a blindfolded criminal is led to the place where the firing squad awaits him. God opens a road, a broad highway is made ready, so that nothing hinders them from gathering. The barriers are removed out of their way. The river Euphrates was, as it were, the river flowing through the midst of Israel's enemies, and served as a natural barrier to protect them. But now that which had been a barrier is removed and made a highway for the enemies from the east. The gates which lead to the slaughterhouse are thrown wide open. The victims think a favor is done to them, and that God is on their side, even as Nebuchadnezzar thought in the days of old. But they are like dumb driven cattle blindly rushing through the wide open gate to the battlefield which will be their last stand. To the church this may seem a calamity, as if God simply gave her over to the enemies, but in reality it is a judgment upon the world. Unclean spirits stir them up, the spirit of the devil, the dragon, the spirit of the beast, anti-Christian world power or politics, the spirit of the false prophet, anti-Christian religion, likened unto frogs, filthy, repulsive, unclean, and hateful. They lead their subjects to their own ruin, blindly thinking they are to obtain a prize, rushing to destruction. Thus is the history of the world, led by false spirits that expects glory and victory, but is instead rushing headlong to defeat. Part 3. The location of this gathering place. The meaning of the word Armegeddon is rather uncertain. Aurora Har seems to mean a mountain. Megiddo or Megiddo is a place forementioned in Judges as the place where the armies of Sisera were defeated by the Lord in the days of Deborah and Barak. Perhaps not any definite place except that it is on earth. May take the key from the story of Judges, where Israel was seemingly hopeless in the power of the enemies, and no way of escape seemed to exist. Everything was against Israel. Such a situation is to prevail against with respect to the church. It perhaps serves rather to give a picture of the situation than to point out an exact location. It is going to be as at Megiddo, and as in Megiddo, when hope seems lost and the enemies seem victorious, Christ is going to step in and completely change the picture. It must be understood as the last stand the world is going to make against God and His church. All the armies of the world, all the forces of evil, shall be enabled to combine in an attack upon God and His church. Outwardly, everything will look favorable to the world, but they have been blindly led into a snare from which there is no escape. It is the thing that leads to the last plague, which we will see is the great judgment of the world unto destruction. Part 4. What this gathering means to the believer. There is danger of becoming fearful. The world seems to be victorious. God seems to have forsaken the church. Her enemies seem to have every advantage. They may get the idea that they should simply surrender. Give up the watch, for what is the use? Let the enemies have free course. Give up the garments of righteousness in favor of the garments of the world. Christ assures them that He will come as a thief in the night, to aid them and to attack the enemy, taking them completely by surprise. When the danger seems greatest, His people may be sure the Lord is at hand, and that their deliverance will be soon. Christ assures them that they are blessed. Not in vain will they stand watch. Not in vain will they keep themselves unspotted from the world. They shall not go naked, shall not be ashamed, shall not be defeated. They are urged to be faithful and not to surrender. Conclusion. Is the Lord even now gathering the armies of the world for the Armageddon? The three evil spirits certainly are working. They promise great things, a golden future, but they blindly lead together to Armageddon.